Hello, everybody, and welcome to what is the first open session that we've done from the Hexham Photography Group. We have had a few Zoom meetings internally just to get used to it, because again, the world's gone crazy with regard to actually getting to our normal meetings and seeing the speakers that we have. So we've decided to open this one up and see if we can encourage other people to consider even coming and joining the Hexham Photography Group, because it is very good. My first introduction to our speaker tonight, David, was back in April when I was recovering from surgery from my kidney cancer, and I was looking for new things to read, to watch, podcasts, photo books and the such like. And I came across a Newcastle publisher called Static Age, who I wasn't aware of. And one of the books caught my eye, which was to do with the pandemic, all in a day's work. And having so recently been in hospital and had such a connection to NHS staff and the work that they were doing in hospital, I bought it immediately to see what it was like. And subsequent to that, I heard and seen David on a number of different podcasts and YouTube videos and the such like, and realized we had such a lot in common. Similar age, similar taste in music, a love for film photography, and to top it all off, we share the same birthday. So I'd like to introduce you to my photography twin, David Collyer.
He's got the better hair, I have to say. Right. I really appreciate being invited to talk to you tonight. Thank you very much. It's been a very, very surreal year for me. So if I can share my screen now, tell me what you can see. So no, my name is David Collyer, and I'm a documentary photographer, and I also work for the NHS. Like a lot of photographers these days, you know, it's an incredibly difficult way to earn a living. You know, you not only rely on your skills as a photographer, but you also rely on a lot of luck as well. And I took the viewpoint a long time ago that I actually didn't particularly want to compromise on the type of work that I shot. And I also like having a steady wage that comes in at the end of the month and feeds myself and feeds the family and gives me a reasonable lifestyle. So I'm something called an Operating Department Practitioner working within the NHS, and I specialise in anaesthetics. So if any of you have ever had an operation, when you go into the anaesthetic room, I'm the person that works alongside the anaesthetist, and I kind of manage the surgical environment and make sure that everything is kept safe. You know, it's the kind of standard joke in the trade that with a Robin to the anaesthetist's Batman. So what you can see here on the front page is an anaesthetist on the left-hand side called Dr. Banu, who is getting gowned and gloved up, ready to go in and do the anaesthetic on an operation on a patient who's got COVID. And one of my colleagues, another ODP, as we're known, Sarah, who's sitting down, absolutely shattered, and this was taken quite early on in the morning, and she's just sort of feeling the effects of the build-up that we all went through, really, where everyone became just so ground down by the whole of the process of dealing with COVID from a clinical perspective. So before I get into that project, what I'll do is just go on to the next page. So let's have a look. Click onto this. So basically a little bit of background about myself and why I take photos. So I've said here that I'm the son of a journalist. I should also say that I'm also the son of a nurse. So my father was a newspaper editor who for most of his career worked at a local level, but big local newspapers. not only in this country but in New Zealand, where I grew up as well. And he ended up his career as editorial director of 40 of the Guardian's titles, and sat on the Press Complaints Commission. So I was really sort of raised in newsrooms and newspaper darkrooms. You know, from a very, very early age, I would go in and I would create my own work, and I would learn how to build a story, and I would make my own little newspapers and hang out with the press photographers. So, you know, all of my school holidays really were when I wasn't with my friends. You know, I would go into work with Dad, and I'd go out on stories, whether that was with the journalist or I'd trail around after the press snappers and really sort of learn how to take photos, but not just from a technical perspective, but also looking at what it actually takes to build up a story around photography and what makes an interesting photo. So I learned how to use a manual SLR camera, and I learned darkroom techniques, and how to mix the chemistry and different ways of developing film and developing a print. I started off with a very, very sort of cheap 110 camera, which was really a load of rubbish. And then I did a gardening round in the village, and I bought Zenit E, and I'm sure many of you out there, if you've been taking photos for a long time, have probably owned a Zenit E at one time or another, because they sold millions and millions of them. I mean, it's this kind of standard joke that it's the Volvo estate of the camera world. It weighs an absolute ton and goes on forever. And my original one is lost somewhere in my parents' attic, but the one that you can see there is one that I actually found in a local charity shop about a month ago in Abergavenny, where I live. And I paid $39.99 for it, which from memory was the same price as the one that I bought secondhand in about 1982, I think.
David, can I just jump in there? Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Is there any chance you can actually run the slideshow itself? Will it go full screen? We've had a couple of requests from it.
So yeah, sorry.
Just play from the current slide. Yeah, that'd be great.
How's that? Is that better?
Super. That's much better.
Cool.
Thank you.
Much better.
Cheers.
I can see it now as well. I'm not fighting against myself. That's good. So yeah, so that camera is one that I bought recently, and I'm yet to put a roll of film through it, but it's absolutely immaculate, and I bought it really for sentimental reasons, as well as being a good camera. So yeah, so a lot of my sort of formative time was spent taking photos, and I've had a monumental year in terms of my development as a photographer, and I've done a couple of interviews with magazines where I've used the standard joke that it's taken me 35 years to be an overnight success, and I've gone from being a photographer who people in the know about, and I get a fair amount of commissions, and I sell a lot of prints, and people who look for a certain style of photography know my work, but all of a sudden I became the most talked about photographer in the country for a couple of weeks because of this project. And I've got people like I've been invited to lunch with David Hearn, and he said that my work on COVID is the best he's seen anywhere in the world, and it's really, really surreal. You suddenly find yourself in this position where not only are you lucky to be in a position where you actually get to shoot something, but lucky that it reaches a worldwide audience as well. So that's kind of part of my journey and sort of how I've ended up where I am at the moment, really. So if I go on to the next slide. So basically what happened was, Rob mentioned a guy called Pete Falkus earlier, who runs a publishing company up in Gateshead called Static Age, and he basically puts out zines, so sort of small pamphlet-based booklets of people's photography, specifically around film photography. And I got introduced to Pete a year or so ago because we've both been guests on a podcast called the Flogger Podcast, looking at photography. And so I'd approached him and said, look, I've got a big body of work going back several years. I'd like to put something out. How can you help me? What can we do? And he said, well, look, I'm completely booked up for the next couple of years. But show me what you've got, and we'll go from there. And so it kind of got put on the back burner as life went on. And then I started shooting this project at work around COVID, and looking at what was happening. And basically the ethos behind my shooting was that we were in a stage where NHS staff were being hailed as heroes, and I'm sure some of you were involved in this as well. You know, and I certainly was. My other half's a nurse, and you know, we'd go out onto our doorstep on Thursday night at 7 o'clock and applaud other key workers and be applauded, and this whole idea of being addressed as a hero and being sort of put on a pedestal really didn't sit well with me. I go to work and I do my job. You know, I'm highly trained as, you know, a clinical professional. It's what I do for a living. I get paid fairly well for it. And I don't consider myself to be a hero. I just consider myself to be somebody who's trained to do a job. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to shoot a photo project, which actually sort of effectively turned the camera back on myself. And the way I was going to do that was basically looking at the group of staff that I work with. So I work in a district general hospital called Neville Hall in South Wales. We're a very, very tight-knit team. And I wanted to put a human face to this eulogizing that was going on a Thursday night. And I'm essentially a film photographer. 80% of the work I do is on film. I thought about how I was going to do it. I thought, would it be easy to shoot digital? Shall I do the romantic thing and go in with my Leica M3 and take light readings and go from there? But actually, at the end of the day, a camera is just a tool. And what I ended up doing was shooting this project on a little Olympus XA3, which is basically a point and shoot camera, which uses a zone focusing system, just a little 35mm with a fixed 35mm lens. It's small enough that it fits in the palm of a hand or in a pocket, or in my case on a lanyard around my neck underneath my scrubs, and really importantly it was wiped clean as well. So I was really thinking of putting a book out, but only on a small scale that would appeal to people who've been directly involved in the project. But I leaked a couple of images onto Instagram and onto social media that were anonymous, as in they were anonymous and you couldn't identify who was in them. And Pete from Static Age saw them and got in touch with me and said, look, let's put a zine out of this work, and maybe we can give the profits to the NHS. And I said, okay, that sounds really interesting, but giving charitable donations to the NHS is like a drop of water in a bucket. Let's give it to something else. Let's give it to a mental health charity. And he said, how many pictures have you got? And I said, well, I've got about 120 that I'd be happy to use as we stand at the moment. So I sent them through to him, and he got back to me immediately and just said, look, I'm blown away by this. I think we need to do a book. And so, you know, that was very exciting on its own, because my New Year's resolution for the last couple of years has been to put a book out of my work. So he said, send me everything through that you've got. So I did a WeTransfer of 120 large files. And this was on Tuesday night, and he said, give me to the end of the week and I'll see what I can work out about what we can do. My phone pinged at around midnight on the Tuesday, and he said, I've already got a draft together for a book. And I just thought, that's ridiculous. This can't have done. It just won't work. And so he sent me this draft through, and I just looked through it and I thought, wow, this looks amazing. So he put together, I think it was a 96-page draft, of all of this, and I had already written something for it, and so I'd sent him that, and we went from there really. So I decided to call it All in a Day's Work, because that kind of harks back to this thing that, you know, we're not heroes. At the end of the day, for me, this is all in a day's work, and so the book was born. And so within 2 weeks we had a book out, and I shot some author photos. There's a probably the best known Welsh author, current author, is a guy called Owen Shears, and he had written the 70th anniversary poem for the NHS, which was called To Provide All People, which was made into a film starring Michael Sheen. And so I got in touch with him and said, do you fancy writing the foreword for a book? And he very kindly agreed to do it. And so we had a book, and it was out. It was printed within 2 or 3 weeks, and we sold out the first print run within 12 hours, and the second print run sold out within 36 hours, I think. So it kind of exceeded all expectations. So basically I'll talk you through the slides, and essentially, I mean, it was very, very interesting, that the whole sort of build up to the COVID crisis in the hospital, because there was an awful lot of waiting around. So, you know, we're a very, very busy DGH, but because we suddenly found ourselves in a very, very different position, a lot of all the elective operations that we do went by the by, and there was a lot of sitting around. There was an awful lot of preparation that went into new clinical scenarios that we were going to have to face as this went on. So you know, we all obviously wear PPE and masks in sort of standard times, but we had to sort of up that to a different level of PPE that would protect us against the virus. So you can see here Jo, who's a nurse on the left, being about to be fit tested for a mask. So she's got a hood on. So this is before the first case of COVID actually hit the hospital, and you can already see the trepidation on her face. So what happens is you put this hood on, and then sort of noxious substances are sprayed into it while you've got a mask on, an FFP3 mask on. If you can taste it or you can smell it within 15 minutes, then the mask doesn't fit, and you cannot use that mask to be in a clinical area. So what's happening at the moment is Greg, who is one of my colleagues, one of my anaesthetic colleagues on the right, is spraying the tester substance in, which so there's a control substance which is sprayed in first of all, just so you know whether somebody is sensitized to it and they can actually sort of taste and smell it. So we all had to go through this several times, because you know one of the problems was that you would use one type of mask, and then because of procurement problems, that type of mask would run out, so you then have to move on to another type of mask. So that's what's happening here. So really, I just kind of went around with my camera, and for the first couple of days, you know, people were very self-conscious that they were being photographed. There was only one person who didn't want their photo taken at all and didn't feature in the project. But you know, after a couple of days, people got very, very used to it, and really, the camera really just became an extension of my hand. I mean, everyone at work knows I'm a photographer and knows I double up as a photographer as well as a practitioner anyway. So that kind of made things easier, and people were really sort of kind of excited to be part of not only the project but the whole thing that was going on with COVID. So I mean, it made for some really sort of good intimate photos, because if you look at this, I mean, this is another photo sort of taken in the sort of downtime beforehand, and these are a couple of anaesthetists, a consultant on the right and a trainee on the left, and really there's just a lot of sitting around waiting for things to happen. So it enabled me to go around and get photos of my colleagues. Here, I don't know what they're looking at on their phones, but they both look like they're sort of enjoying themselves. They're probably sort of swapping things on social media, I think. But for the first week or two, there really was an awful lot of downtime. And this is so this chap on the left is Carl. So Carl is a simulation training mannequin. And he probably costs around twice what I earn in a year. And I find him slightly disconcerting because he looks like a dead version of me. I've got a photo of him somewhere wearing my glasses, but the first time I came across him was in an anaesthetic room, and one of our intensive care consultants was in there, and you can program him, and you can make him work in certain ways, and all of his vital signs, like his blood pressure and his heart rate, will respond to a computer program which is programmed into an iPad. And I walked past and just saw this bald, grey looking chap looking the worse for wear, and I said to Ed, who was the consultant, I said, "Are you all right? Do you need me to come and give you a hand?" And he went, no, I'm fine. I said, "Well, are you sure?" And he went, "Yeah, fine. Why?" And I said, "Well, because he doesn't look like he's doing very well." And so he said, "Oh, have you not met Carl?" So I went and had a look, and it's really weird, because even when you get up close to him, I mean, he looks just like a middle-aged guy. He's got hair coming out of his ears and out of his nostrils, and sort of random hair sticking out of his shoulders, and it's really quite unnerving. But so he was used for a lot of the simulated practice. And Linda, who's one of the nurses here, is obviously enjoying getting to know him well at this point. And funnily enough, a photo that you'll see later on in probably in a couple of slides' time. Is the only photo in the whole of the set that I took that I received any complaints about, because he's so realistic that somebody thought it was a real patient. And I actually made the decision early on not to involve real patients in the project. Couple of reasons for that, really. One, it's a lot more complex trying to get ethical clearance to shoot patients. I wanted to get the work out quickly. It's a news story. Essentially, I'm a news photographer. If you're going to get work out there, you need to get it out there quickly. But also, I felt slightly uncomfortable when people can't get in and see their relatives. It's, you know, photography is a voyeuristic medium at the end of the day. There's only so many pictures you can see of patients wearing masks on ventilators, with doctors all wearing masks and gowns around them, before everything starts to look the same. So what I really wanted to do was just go for the human element in the story, and actually to look at who we are as a body of staff. So, you know, we're a really small unit in the hospital, and one of the things that made it a joy as a photographer to actually shoot is that there's this real intimacy. A lot of these people have actually sort of worked together all their careers, and essentially they've grown up together as well. So Graham here on the right is a consultant anaesthetist. Sadie on the left is an ODP like myself. Her mother is also an ODP. So, you know, a lot of these guys have known Sadie since she was a little girl, because her mother has worked in the hospital, and I've worked in an awful lot of hospitals now in my time, and there's a real hierarchy in a lot of hospitals, in that, you know, the nurses and the ODPs don't talk to the porters, and the porters don't talk to the cleaning staff, and the consultants don't talk to the trainees, and the trainees don't talk to the nurses. Because there's this ridiculous ingrained hierarchy that I am better than you because I do a certain job. But effectively, we're all, you know, we're like a watch or a machine. You know, no part can work without the other parts being there. And the beauty of working in a hospital like this, particularly in an environment like South Wales, where it's very, very family orientated, very, very friendly, is the whole of the team are like a family. You know, we all work together, we all play together. You know, we go to the pub together, we go out on bike rides together, and we all have a good time. And that intimacy means that there's this incredible bond, and not only is that essential when you're dealing with something as catastrophic as COVID has been, but because everyone looks out for each other. But it means that you've got this incredible intimacy. And, you know, these photos now that you're seeing are all really before anything's happened. So you're seeing people, you know, friendly and having a good time, and everyone's having a good laugh. But it's not long before the wheels fell off. And you know, as the clinical scenario changed, then people start to look very, very stressed. But there's still this incredible bond between them. So where are we going? Hang on. My screen appears to have frozen. Right. So again, like I've alluded to, you know, there's this real sort of intimacy in the team, and being part of the team means that I could get in and actually sort of capture sort of silly moments. So Gemma on the left here and Pete are both ODPs, both at sort of different ends of their career, really, and Gemma spotted that Pete had some stray eyebrow hairs, so was cutting them, and I just happened to sort of walk in as this was happening and get a photo of it. And this is the type of thing that, as a photographer, you, particularly as a documentary photographer, you often find that when photojournalists or documentarists shoot a project, they might spend 2 or 3 weeks with the subject without even getting a camera out. I had the advantage that I didn't need to do that, because I've spent 3 years with these people without getting a camera out. So I was able to hit the ground running. And I think a lot of photographers, if they'd been given a brief by a newspaper or a magazine to go in and shoot a scenario like this in a hospital, wouldn't have been able to get photos like this, because they wouldn't have had the advantage of actually being part of the team. And that was another one of the reasons why I really wanted to shoot the staff and not the patients, because it's moments like this that make the project magic, really. And you know, it kind of, photos like this sort of sell it to a wider audience, because it really gives it the human touch rather than just looking at anonymous faces. So here again, we've got a couple of my colleagues waiting for something to happen. So they've decided to amuse themselves by, lots of photos went up around the hospital, sort of showing the correct way to to put on and take off the new PPE that everyone had to wear, the sort of donning and doffing process. So they've decided that they're going to draw comedy breasts and devil's horns on a picture of one of the managers. And there he is there. So this is Archie, who's the anaesthetic boss, and he's Scottish ex Marine commando, hard as nails, but a good laugh. Probably some of his management techniques are better suited to the 1970s or the 1980s, but he gets away with it. But he's a good sport. You can see that he was quite happy with being put in a bikini and devil's horns. So. And again, that's one of the joys of being part of the team, is you get to shoot things like this. This is the photo or one of the photos that I leaked onto social media. Things are just beginning to change here. So when this was taken, we were just beginning to get COVID patients into the hospital. And none of them had been intubated for ventilation for ITU yet. We were still a day or two off that. We're probably a week into the crisis, 2 to 3 weeks into from when we all knew something was going to happen, but a week into the sort of clinical aspects where patients had started to come through the front door who were displaying signs of COVID. I drew the analogy in the piece that I wrote for a newspaper, saying that waiting for COVID was very, very much like waiting for a tsunami. You're standing on a shore, you're having fun on the beach, but this thing is coming, and you can hear it coming, and you can see it coming, and you can smell it coming. We'd all been looking at media from around the world and seeing what was going to happen. And there's this inevitability, and that that this thing is going to hit the shore, but you don't know when it's going to hit the shore. The only thing you really know is when it is. So by the time we're sort of 2 to 3 weeks into the crisis, the looks on people's faces are starting to change. People are beginning to get tired. I spoke to the clinical director of the hospital I used to work in Bristol, and really strange, because they're a massive, massive hospital. Compared to us, I think they've got 40 ITU beds. We, in standard times, have 8. Which we tripled during the crisis. They got away really lightly, and I think they only had 16 patients at any one time throughout the crisis. But he said that the way their staff were being affected was really everyone had preparation fatigue, just because it's the constant training to do something that it's very, very similar to what you do on a daily basis, but it's different because you've got this emotional strain that that this is going to affect you, not only in terms of what you're going to see from the perspective of you're watching, but we're all used to watching patients die. It's unfortunately it's part of what we do. We see people die. It doesn't happen very often in a small hospital where I work. My background is working in massive major trauma units in inner cities, so there is nothing that I haven't seen, from stabbings to gunshots to big road traffic accidents and pileups. There's nothing I haven't seen in my career, but this is different because there the adrenaline gets you through. It's what comes through the door. Here you're waiting for it to happen, and so really it's a bit like a war of attrition, that it wore people down very, very, very sort of quickly, because people are just fatigued, and people know if somebody comes through the door and they've been involved in a car crash, that might affect you mentally. It's not going to affect you physically. With COVID, you're putting your health and your life on the line because you are exposed to the disease that is killing the patient that you are dealing with. And that's what made this scenario very different to a lot of the things that practitioners deal with. And it's what made really for a good story, because the trajectory of the story was that people started off happy, people were excited. It was a bit like a party atmosphere because new things were happening. Whereas by the end of the crisis, people had had enough of it. People were so worn down by this. Some of us became ill. One of my one of my close colleagues ended up in hospital himself. If you look at what happened to NHS staff throughout the country, many died. So this was a different kettle of fish that none of us have had to deal with. So I leaked this this photo, and this is the one that did it for me. But I really like this photo, partly because the face is obscured. It's got that anonymity, but I always describe myself as a documentary photographer who shoots the story, but I probably pay a lot more attention to light and composition than a lot of documentary photographers do. And this one, I love the geometric pattern on the plastic gown that he's wearing, and the fact that it looks like it's almost like a sort of crocodile skin valise or something like that. It's got a beautiful sort of textural tone and quality to it. So by this point, we're all wearing full PPE for any operation that involves a general anaesthetic. So you can see here that people are beginning to improvise. So Jenny on the left is a consultant anaesthetist. She's got the full PPE on. She's got you can probably just see the glinting above her eye. She's got a visor on as well. Kumar, who is a consultant surgeon in the background, he decided that he didn't like the visors. So what I love about this photo is he's a big sort of DIY guy, and he's gone into his garage and he's picked up a pair of goggles that he would use for DIY at home, and he's brought those into use because they fit better over his glasses. And it just makes for a good photo because there's something a bit Heath Robinson about it. People have already decided that they're going to adapt their gear and cobble together their own work. And for me personally, this photo has a sentimental story to it as well, because Kumar's wife Purnima was a consultant anaesthetist who died of a brain hemorrhage about a year and a half ago, and I was actually with her when she died. I was working alongside her. She went to lunch, came back. I made a joke that she'd taken too long for lunch and had come back when all the work was done. And I think her last words were "suck it up, buttercup" to me. And she then walked back through the door into the anaesthetic room, and I turned around because I heard a funny noise and looked through, and she'd collapsed, and she died. And there's something about the job that I do that it gives you a very fatalistic view on life, and it makes you appreciate everything about what you've got, and that life is transitory, and to really to live for the day, because you never know when your time's up. And COVID, and one of the reasons I want to shoot COVID as well is because we've all seen it now from a different perspective, and COVID has really made me appreciate what I've got, and certainly being able to shoot it, from a documentary photographer's perspective has really sort of made me appreciate that. Just to grasp the nettle, get out there and do what you want to do, and make the most of it, of any opportunity as well. And so this is the photo that raised complaints. So when I decided to shoot this project, I got permission. I'm a newspaper trained photographer, so I understand that you have to dot the I's and cross the T's in terms of getting ethical clearance and getting participants permission to actually put anything out onto a public stage, because this is shot obviously in very sort of sensitive times in private property. So I went to my line managers. They were happy with it. They'd seen my work. They know my work. From there, I went to the CEO of the trust. So I decided that I would go straight to the top, and get her permission to do it. And from there, I was advised to go to the press. So every trust, every big clinical organisation has what's called a comms team or a communications team, who deals with any press releases. So I went to them. They'd already been tipped off by the CEO that I was doing this, and they were more than happy. They wanted to see anything that I put into print, not from the perspective of vetoing or vetting anything that I put out, but just if there was any comeback, they would cover my arse, basically. This is the only photo that got out into the public domain that received any complaints, because people thought that it was a real patient. This again is Carl, the mannequin. And so I received an email from the comms team of the trust saying, we've had a complaint about the patient on the table. And I said, I haven't put anything out onto, and they said they've seen it on social media. And I said, I haven't put anything out onto social media. So I'm not sure where this is coming from. But it turned out that actually the publisher had used this photo as a promo shot for the book, and somebody had gone to the publisher's page and seen this and had complained that it was too graphic. Had this been a real patient, the staff here would be wearing PPE, but this is just a simulated practice. So, but as soon as they knew that it was a mannequin, it was all cleared up. And actually, to be honest, there's no such thing as bad publicity. We all know this. It doesn't hurt if people complaining about your work, because it means that it's hitting a chord, and it's having a dramatic effect on the viewer. So I was quite happy with that. The worst thing about shooting a project like this would be if it didn't upset anyone, to be honest, because if the subject matter isn't disturbing to a degree, then you probably not done your job properly as a photographer. This is a consultant anaesthetist, and he's got the mask on, and Gemma, another one of my colleagues, in the background. Jake, who's the consultant, and I go back a long way. I was there for the birth of his first child when we both worked together in Bristol many years ago. So it's always nice to work with him. Again, so we're getting into a stage now where Andy, who's one of the consultants, is wearing a hood because he's one of the people who failed the fit tests. None of the FFP3 masks would actually fit him. So he has, every time he goes into an operation, he has to wear this hood, which has a ventilation system on the back, which goes to what I call the Roger Ramjet jetpack, which fits onto a belt. So he has to work with this constant white noise going on around him. And I always make the standard joke. He's about 6'6", I think, and that he's so tall that his head's in the atmosphere, so he has to dress like a spaceman. This is outside. So we opened up 2 separate ITU areas at work, and this is outside the second ITU area because we very, very quickly reached capacity with ventilated patients. This is an ODP on the left called Steve, and Adrian, who's a consultant anaesthetist, and they're just waiting to go in, change of shift, and it's their turn to go into ITU. So they're in the donning area. So you've probably heard the phrases donning and doffing on the news. Donning, it sounds almost Shakespearean. Donning the protective equipment and doffing it, taking it off at the end. So they're just waiting to go in and don their PPE. Adrian's just checking his pager to see what's going on in the outside hospital. But I like the symmetry of this. It kind of reminds me of those old cuckoo clocks or this kind of Bill and Ben clocks, where one man comes out and then as another man goes in on the strike, and you've got the sort of the symmetry in the wall, sort of dividing it down the middle. So from an aesthetic point of view, it's quite a nice shot as well. This was a shot taken at the end of the day. There was a briefing just before the shift change at 6 o'clock. So we go in for the sort of 5 o'clock, 5:30 briefing. This is our manager, theatre manager, on the left-hand side, just sort of talking to us, and Linda, who's one of the theatre staff, has just found a wheelchair. Every day, actually, she seemed to find the wheelchair. I've got lots of photos of Linda sitting in a wheelchair. But I thought that makes for a good photo as well. People are already just looking bored and fatigued, and NHS management tend not to have a lot of respect from the staff anyway, and you can see on the faces of some of these people that's probably the case in this. So this is one of the first intubations of a COVID positive patient about to happen. I I personally did the first intubation myself. This is so on the right you've got a consultant anaesthetist, and on the left you've got another ODP, and they're just getting to grips with how to put the equipment on. They're about to go and spend. It was taking us, when we intubated patients to begin with, a good 3 to 4 hours to get the tube in, to put all of the central lines into patients that that they need to be monitored for their time in ITU. This patient died. The patient they're about to intubate died. And the patient that I intubated, which was the first one, died, and they were brothers. A really, really sad case. What can you say? There's a lot of stuff going on at the moment on social media, which is largely being driven by right-wing agitator groups and the David Ickes of this world, who are claiming that COVID is all a big hoax and claiming that it's being blown out of proportion. People like myself and people like these guys here who have worked with it and have seen the realities of COVID, know the reality, know what's happening, know what has happened. I was on call last night. There's a lot of talk about the second wave coming. I don't like to talk about it as the second wave because the first wave hasn't gone away yet. We've just managed to control it. I think lockdown is inevitable again. I envisage probably starting reshooting this project very soon. I got a phone call at 6 o'clock this morning saying that there was somebody in A&E showing COVID symptoms and needed intubating. So that's how my day started this morning. So we move on to the next one. This is another operation on a patient who had tested positive for COVID. They're not having an operation because of the COVID. They're having an operation because they needed an emergency bowel operation. They just happened to have COVID symptoms. So again, everyone is in full PPE. The chap on the right is another person whose child I was there for the birth of. So that kind of shows the intimacy of the team that we're working. I did his anaesthetic when. Well, his wife's anaesthetic, I should say, when she had an emergency cesarean section. So this is the photo which changed everything for me, really. So Sarah is one of my anaesthetic colleagues. She's the woman who was in the first photo, sitting down. Looking shattered. This is her default position when she's tired. She finds somewhere to sit and sort of wraps her knees up in her arms. And you can see that she's got a 1,000-yard stare on. And one of my photographic heroes is Don McCullin. And Don McCullin, along with a guy called Chris Chapman, who is a Dartmoor photographer, very, very different subject matters, are probably the two photographers that are more responsible than anyone else for the way I shoot. Not so much the subject matter, but the lighting I use, the composition of my photos, my raison d'etre for actually shooting photos. And when I look at Sarah in this photo, she's got that 1,000-yard stare on that you see in a lot of the people in the photographs of people like Don McCullin or Larry Burrows or John Stoddard. They've been worn down by what they've seen. So there's a story behind this photo. So when we went into lockdown, I started shooting people in my street. I live in a small sort of 60 house, a street of 60 terrace houses in South Wales, quite a close knit street. And I decided that, I was going to drive me mad if I couldn't get out and shoot my sort of normal subject matter. So I decided that I would do a socially distanced photo shoot, taking photos of people in the street. The Guardian got to hear about it and wanted to do a story on it, because apparently I was one of the first photographers in the country to do that. But then, of course, everyone has the same idea. And, one of the things about photography is if you think you've had an original idea, you're either very, very naive or you're misguided. because, you know, particularly at a time when people can't get out and do things, everyone suddenly comes up with this bright idea. I know what, you know, let's do a distance project where I'm going to shoot people from a distance of 2 meters. So the Guardian heard about this, and then of course, you know, it got put on the spike because everyone else wanted it. But I had mentioned to the Guardian that I was shooting in hospital, and they were very, very interested in that, and so they asked me if I would submit something. So for the Guardian photo essay that they do. So I sent a few photos in, and this was one of them, and they said that they would put it online. And I didn't hear anything for about a week or so, and I thought, well, that's probably been spiked as well, but you know, never mind. And then one evening, I got an email from the picture editor saying, we're going to run the piece tomorrow online, and we're going to put something in print. Do you have a profile picture that we can use? And I thought, oh, that's great. So I sent the profile picture in, and then breakfast the next morning, my phone pinged because I've got it set up on notifications to let me know when there's a new photo essay in the Guardian. And sure enough, it was my my photo essay. So I think they printed, or online, I think they put about 15 photos in, 15 to 20, and 500 words, I think it was, that I'd written. It might have been 1,000 words actually that I'd written for it. And I just looked at it over, and you know, and I've had a lot of stuff in the press over the years, but it's been local stuff. But you know, to get it into one of the most well-known national papers in the world was fantastic. And so I'm looking at it online, and you know, showed my other half, and you know, said it's fantastic. It looks really good. They've laid it out really well. And then I cycled into work because I knew that they were going to put something in print as well. And I cycled into the local garage forecourts on the way to work, and I sort of pulled up to the newsstand, and I looked down, and there was that photo of Sarah on the front page of the Guardian. And I won't say now what I said, but it was a very Anglo-Saxon word, kind of at the top of my voice. And I just got off, and I picked up the papers, and I almost fell off my bike because it was so surreal. And I opened it up, and I had a double-page spread inside as well. So, you know, I was expecting, you know, maybe half a column on page 27 with a couple of photos, but I had the front page, and I had 2 whole pages inside the Guardian of my words and my photos as well. And from that point on, really, as a photographer, my life changed. The phone didn't stop ringing. I was getting emails from, you know, magazines, websites all over the world. I've done so many web interviews. I've done so many magazines. Peter Dench interviewed me and did a piece about me for Amateur Photographer. I was in Silver Grain Classics this month, which is one of the biggest film magazines in the world. I've got commissions out of it. I've sold lots of books out of it. But it's just crazy. So, you know, if you believe in yourself as a photographer, never give up. Keep going. I mean, my son is 19 now. He's a fantastic photographer. He is about to start a photojournalism degree at the London College of Communication. And I've said to him that, you know, you're going to find it very, very hard to make a career as a photographer, but never give up. If you believe in your subject, if you believe in your abilities as a photographer, and he's certainly got them. He's a much, much better photographer than I am. Then go for it. But, you know, it took me a long time to find my style. You know, I like the rest of us, I've taken a lot of crap photos over 35 years, and it's probably only in the last 10 years that I've really, really developed my style, but I've never given up on it. I've always pushed it, and I've always been sort of very good at promoting myself. I'm quite good at playing the social media game to get my stuff out there. And really, you know, I was lucky to be in the right place with the COVID stuff, but also I made my own luck in terms of getting it out there. And that's what I would say to any other photographer. Don't be afraid of being pushy, because nobody's going to do it for you. You really need to get out there and do your own stuff. So this photo really, really changed my life as a photographer. And you know, I got to work. I phoned my dad, and he said, I saw your work on Guardian online. Fantastic. Looks really, really good. And I said, thank you. I said, I got the front page as well. And he went, oh, the Abergavenny Chronicle. He said, that's really, really good news, really good news. And I said, no, I've got the front page of the Guardian, Dad. And I could kind of hear cornflakes being spat out across the breakfast table as I said this. And he said to me, do you realise what you've done? And I said, what do you mean? He said, do you realise what you've done to get your work on the front page of a national newspaper? He said, there are photographers that will never achieve that in their lifetime. And it took a while to sink in, but actually that's what I achieved. And it took me a good 2 weeks when the book arrived for me to be able to look at it and without being hypercritical. And now I'm really proud of what I've achieved as a photographer, and building on that. So this is me on the left-hand side. I just spent 5 hours on a case in PPE, and you can't quite see the pool of sweat on the floor, but really I feel like a boil in the bag fish in that. I'm absolutely drained. I'm not sitting down up against the wall for dramatic effect. I'm sitting down because if I didn't sit down, then I would have fallen down. And the beauty of using the little Olympus point and shoot was that I was able to give the camera to one of my colleagues and say, frame it like this and press the shutter. And so he got that photo of me. And again, there's another colleague on the right hand side who's probably feeling exactly the same way. It was just absolutely shattering. I'll come on to something else, but I had 6 weeks off work after COVID, and I've only recently gone back into wearing red PPE again, and I'd forgotten just how grueling it is to be in red PPE. So this was taken at about 3 o'clock in the morning when we breached the ITU capacity that we had. So all of a sudden we had to take anaesthetic machines into a different area and set up another ITU. So this is Stuart, who's one of my colleagues. Technically, it's not a particularly good photo. It's a little bit too grainy, but actually, from a compositional point of view, I think it works, and it's kind of got that 3 o'clock in the morning feel to it as well. So I can live with the technical inadequacies of it. So it's good. There's Glenn, another one of my colleagues, just looking very, very tired, and Vince, another one in the background, again just looking tired. This was at the end of a case and end of the day, and just really, really shattered. So this is quite an interesting one, because the way the system works is if you're in theatre in full PPE and you can't come out while there's a case on the table. So this was another one of my colleagues showing some drug calculations on a phone to the other colleague on the inside, because obviously you can't have phones in theatre, particularly at the moment. So showing things through the window. So there was a lot of sort of note passing and note writing and holding things up for people to get information off. So this photo on the left-hand side is the one photo that I kick myself about that isn't in the first edition of the book. There is another version of it where Lauren, who is the nurse in the box, you can see her face and she's sort of waving her hands in a sort of jazz hand style. So the story behind this photo is that it's at the end of the day, we have just cleared theatres out, given them a really good clean down. That's a box that surgical gowns have come in, and Lauren just crawled into the box and said, "I'm so tired, I don't think I could even get in my car to go home, I'm going to sleep here." This photo is the one photo that other photojournalists that I have been interviewed by and have spoken to have said is the standout photo of the set, because it just shows how tired people are. My mum, who was a theatre sister and was a nursing sister, and I think she was even a matron at one point, said this for her is the photo that just reminds her of what it was like to be dog tired at the end of a shift. So Lauren qualified this year. So, people like myself who are old dogs who've been doing this for a long time, there's nothing we haven't seen in our careers. Sarah, who is the nurse who was the ODP who was on the front page of the The Guardian and Lauren both qualified this year, and they couldn't have chose to qualify at a worse time, because they're facing things that most people will have never seen in their career. ODP is an interesting role. It's one of those jobs that people have never heard of. It's always joked that we're the best kept secret in healthcare. If nurses are the infantry, we're the SAS. One of the other reasons I'm very, very proud of the photo that I took of Sarah that made it to the front page of the Guardian is it's the first time an ODP has been on the front page of a paper, and it's really the first time that the general public have seen and know what an ODP is. So again, moving on to the right-hand side, just another operation. Kumar still with his plastic DIY goggles on, and I think that's Tess, who's one of the Filipino nurses that we work with. So this guy here, I mean, you can see the strain etched on his face. So Jeremy is the one person who said to me, I don't want you taking my photo. I don't like my photo taken. But I put him in the book anyway, because I thought there was such an honesty about this photo. You can just see the strain etched on his face. Now, Jeremy is a guy who has worked all over the world, not just clinically. He is also an ex-Marine commando. So there's not a lot that this guy hasn't seen in terms of theatre from a health perspective and in terms of theatre from a war perspective. And you can still see what this crisis has done to him by the look on his face. He came and had a word with me when the book came out. I gave all of my colleagues, all of my anaesthetic colleagues, a signed copy of the book. And he came and had a word and said, look, he said, I did tell you I didn't want that photo taken, but I'm really pleased that you put it in the book, because it really conveys just what we were going through at the time. And I have to say, it conveys probably what we're going to go through again, I think. So yet another one of Linda in her favourite wheelchair, and ITU nurses going into to ITU. So these guys on the left, work 10-hour shifts, 11-hour shifts in ITU. They would have one break during that. They would be in that PPE for all of that time. So I say, I don't know whether any of you have got the book or any of you have seen the Guardian piece at all. I say in the book that we're all worried about our kidneys, because we don't drink enough during this. And, you go to the loo and your pee's the colour of Coca-Cola. And there's an awful lot of health problems that have come out of wearing this PPE. Dermatological problems with people wearing the masks all the time. Problems with dehydration. I was very worried about my kidneys, because my pee was a very funny colour. Rob knows the background to this. I turned out not to have kidney problems. I turned out to actually be diagnosed with bladder cancer in June, and so that's why I had the 6 weeks off that I alluded to. I was lucky. I had an operation within 10 days of being diagnosed, and unfortunately, although it was a big tumour, it was non-invasive, and so I'm kind of back on the horse again now. Albeit somebody's going to stick a camera up me every 3 months and check that it hasn't regrown. I have to say I much prefer being behind a camera than being around a camera, but I know the score. I work in healthcare. It can happen to me as much as it can happen to anyone else. But that 6 weeks off certainly gave me time to reflect on what I'd seen and what I was going through, and I had forgotten just how grueling it is being in full red PPE. And what everyone went through. 5 minutes in this stuff is torture. It really isn't pleasant. And so like it says here, through adversity comes strength. I mean, I watched the team, who were already a very, very tight-knit team, bond together here Gemma is combing and plaiting Wendy's hair. Wendy's just been in a case. Wendy missed a lot. She's a very, very experienced practitioner. Missed a lot of the COVID crisis because of a tragedy in her family, where her father died suddenly of cancer, and is a farmer, and died right in the middle of the lambing season. So Wendy effectively has taken over the running of the farm, and is doing that as well as working clinically as a practitioner. So really, you know, we really look after each other as a team. You know, like any family, you know, we're not all best friends, but we do all have this incredibly strong bond. And what I love, like I alluded to at the beginning, about being embedded in the team as a clinical member of it, is that it enabled me to take photos like this, really, and be right there, and you know, see sort of magical moments like this evolve. This photo I really, really like. Jess has got amazing eyes anyway. You know, but you could just see she's being really sort of playful through the window as she's sort of pulling her glove on in that sort of you know, carry on doctor, the doctor will see you now, and I like the fact that it's echoed as well with the other person in the middle distance as well, also putting a glove on. But I just like the way that Jess is doing it in that really sort of playful way, while sort of giving me the eye through the window as well. It just makes for a sort of funny photo, I think. And you know, one of the things about working in theatres is it's not an environment that's for the faint-hearted, but it's not called theatre for nothing. So it does attract larger than life characters. There's no room for sort of shrinking violets really in theatre. You know, you need a very, very strong stomach, and it really helps if you have a dark sense of humour. And so a lot of the humour that goes on in theatres would be deemed as being very, very inappropriate by people who are on the outside, but there's a very, very good reason for that. I mean, it's effectively like gallows humour. If you can't have a sense of humour about what you see, then you probably wouldn't be able to cope with it. You know, we see things that people should really never have to see in their lives, and there's a sort of playfulness that goes along with it as well. This photo, so Laurie, who was 40 today when that was taken, and Kate's another one who only qualified this year. Laurie's a very experienced nurse. Most people don't work on their birthday. I rarely work on my birthday. I always try to take it off. Laurie chose to come in and work on her 40th birthday. She's an incredibly integral part of the team, has been there for quite a long time. Tragically lost her 7-year-old daughter about 4 years ago to neuroblastoma, to just a horrible cancer, which I've dealt with many times when I've done paediatric work. So you know, it's a privilege to work with her, and you know, we all look after her, and you know, it was a privilege to spend that really special day with her, and to be able to photograph her on it as well. So you know, there's always sort of happy times amongst the tears as well in this environment. This photo I really like. So Pete on the right, he's kind of my work twin, really. You know, we're both South Londoners. We've both been around the block several times. He has come back into full-time healthcare after an 11-year career in the military and a 22-year career as a detective, but also worked as a medic in the TA all the way through his police career. So there's nothing he hasn't seen, and you know, he's kind of at the end of his career, while Sadie on the left-hand side is at the beginning of her career, and I just love the juxtaposition of the two. I mean, Pete's just arrived at work. He's not yet in his scrubs, and Sadie's at the end of her shift, and she's just had a shower, and she's putting her mascara on. before going out and going home. But Pete looks like he should be her bouncer in this one. I think she's the sort of glamorous little starlet, and Pete's her minder. And it's just a nice human touch, I think, in that photo. This one again, I mean, this is the kind of stupid humour that you get in hospitals. So we were absolutely bombarded with gifts from local shops and local restaurants. You know, we were fed every day by local restaurants who would give us punnets of food. You know, we've got 2 Michelin star restaurants in Abergavenny, and you know, there were days where I would have meals from Michelin star restaurants twice in a day. You know, and this is a box of fruit that's been given to us by one of the supermarkets or one of the greengrocers, and obviously one of the advantages of being a man is that you never ever have to grow up, and Peter's demonstrated to Glenn what you can do with a banana and 2 apples, and so I just thought, you know, that's just a nice silly photo. So what have we got next? And this is the cover of my book. So the no entry sign is at the entrance to the theatre suite. And the back cover of the book is the same photo taken about 6 weeks later, but the footfall has basically worn away all of the wording on the cover of the book. The book actually sold out through the publishers. I've got a lot of copies here, which I can sell. If anyone wants a copy of the book, they can get in touch with me through Rob, or just look me up on Instagram or Facebook, and I will very happily sell you a copy of the book, and I'll even put my paw print in the front of it. So where do we go from here? I was lucky enough that my work brought me to the attention of some very esteemed photographers, and I got invited to have lunch with David Hearn, to go over to his house, and he took me out to the local pub and bought me Sunday lunch, and then we went back to his house, or I went to his house first, then we went back again afterwards, and you know, he showed me the camera that he made his name on shooting the Hungarian Revolution in 1957, and we had a chat about photography, and he signed a book for me and I signed a book for him, and you know, he told me that my work on COVID was the best that he'd seen anywhere in the world, including a couple of Magnum photographers who had done it. And you know, I was a bit like a kid in the sweet shop. I don't think I stopped grinning for a week afterwards, but the one thing he said to me was, where do you go from here? What is your next project that you're working on? He said, you know, everything he shoots, he's always thinking about not just the shot, but putting it together as a body of work. So, you know, have I got the close up? Have I got the panoramic shot? Have I got the lead in shot that tells me what it is? It's really important as a photographer not to be defined by one shot, by one project. And you know, it's, to be honest, I'm going to find that really difficult, because I joked to a few people that, you know, I was gonna surf the 15 minutes of minor celebrity that the All in a Day's Work project had brought me, but actually I was, you know, I've subsequently been told by various photojournalists that they're all incredibly jealous because none of them were allowed into hospitals to shoot. So worldwide, you can probably count, or, you know, on the fingers of your hands, how many photographers have actually been allowed into hospitals to shoot. So I have been put in the really privileged position of, I've shot history, you know, so this work will still be, people will still be looking at this work as long as people want to look at documentary work. So I probably will be defined by this project, but you need to look at where you're going on. So I always like to do something that challenges me. I was brought up in the church by parents, particularly a mother who was very religious. I'm an atheist myself, you know, and I sort of moved away from that. But you know, there's that standard joke that an atheist is a man who spends his whole life thinking about God. I'm always really fascinated by how people use religious iconography and religious insignia as kind of a prop, not only to sort of advertise their faith, but to give themselves comfort in sort of times of need, and that kind of moves on from, you know, the sort of COVID crisis. People have needed a lot of comfort, so I'm sort of shooting a project called Your Own Personal Jesus at the moment, based on how people use sort of religious insignia and iconography. And I've got a couple of publishers who are interested in that. Actually, one of the beauties of having a successful project is you've suddenly got currency in the world of getting things published. Another one of the projects I'm doing is called 50 Plus. I'm 53 now, so 53 years ago in 2017. I'm really fascinated by aging, particularly in men, and how different we are to our father's generation. So, you know, our father's generation were the baby boomers. They'd come out of the post-war years. Life was very, very different then. Fashion was only just beginning to get tribal, you know, with the sort of advent of the Teddy Boys, and then the mods and rockers in the 60s, and the hippies and the punks. You know, I got into fashion in the early 80s as part of the sort of mod revival. And I'm really interested in how men of my age have kind of almost sort of clung on to onto that sort of tribalism that we got involved in fashion, and how very, very different we are to our father's generation. So I've been shooting this project for the last 3 years now. So the guy on the left with the dreadlocks and the dogs is a guy called Grant Marshall, who some of you who the younger ones or into music may know of. He is in the British band Massive Attack, who are one of the biggest British bands of the last 30 years. And I bumped into him in a supermarket, and I wasn't going to ask him if I could shoot him, because I thought I'll leave him in peace. You know, everyone probably wants a piece of him. And then I thought, no, I'm a photographer. You don't get to take photos of people if you don't make your own luck. And so I explained the project to him, and he was really interested in it. And so I got invited round to his house a few months later. Most people will say yes on the spot that I'd shoot them. People like him are very, very controlling of their image, and he wanted to see a decent body of work from me before he said yes. But I got invited around to his house, and I took the photo of him. The guy on the right is a guy called Ali, who I bumped into in Monmouth in Wales, and he is the classic example of why you should never ever judge a book by its cover. Funny enough, I was walking past a lingerie shop when I looked in the window, and there was this guy standing in it with his wife, and I just thought, I've got to take his photo. Now I'm fairly heavily tattooed myself, although you can't actually see mine because I kind of hide them all for professional reasons. Ali really wears his tattoos all over him. When you speak to him, he is one of the most well-spoken people I've met in my life. He is a classical pianist, professional musician. He has played all over the world, concert pianist. Now plays he's got his own bands, you know, he does a bit of sort of punk stuff and things like that. Just a really, really, really nice guy. But I mean, as a photographer, I mean, that guy is just a dream. I mean, you know, a lot of my work is portrait-based photography. And, you know, for a documentary photographer shooting a project about men in their 50s and how different we are to our father's generation, I mean, you couldn't invent this guy. I mean, it doesn't really get much better than that. Grant, very, very chilled out, but also intense at the same time. And he, more than anyone else, when I've taken a photo, you can feel his eyes just boring through the camera into you. And then, you know, you can see it in there. I shot that photo was shot using available light on a 1959, in fact they both were, in fact, on a 1959 Leica M3. You know, it's just got that beautiful, beautiful clarity to it that you get from Kodak Tri-X film and a lens of that age. So I've had this weird fascination mannequins from the perspective of taking photos of them, and actually, so my next book coming out is actually going to be about mannequins, and I think it probably stems from being a kid and seeing mannequins on Doctor Who, and there's just something very, very sinister, I think, about mannequins, but also I think they reflect a lot of what goes on in society, particularly from the perspective of the female image. If you look at male mannequins, I mean, they're all fairly homogenized. They're all much of a muchness. Female mannequins tend to be based on and sculpted on the top models of the day. And of course, fashion is cyclical. And so as one look goes out of fashion, so does the look of the mannequin. So you find that what probably started off life in a very, very expensive department store or boutique works its way down through the chain and eventually ends up in sort of lesser small town shops and less fashionable shops until they eventually get dumped. So you go into reclamation yards or junk yards and you find a lot of mannequins just dumped. And I mean, they're beautiful from the perspective of taking photos of them because they're sculptural pieces, really. But it's also, the story of where they end up is quite nice. I still kick myself that I didn't actually buy that one on the left-hand side to put in the garden, because I thought it would be just quite nice. I could turn it into a bird feeder or something. I'd put its arms out. But I love the fact that the price on it has been reduced. First there were 2, then her twin got sold, and she started off as 50 quid, and then it went down to 30 quid because she's got a missing finger. And I think there's a story there about how she lost her finger as well. So, but there's just. I decided that this was going to be the next book because, one, it gets my work out to a completely different market as well, but also I think it's kind of putting a musical perspective onto it. It's kind of the difficult second album syndrome, isn't it? Where do you go from Led Zepp 1 or the Stone Roses' first album? You've got to go to something that's completely different, and you can't really get much more different from shooting the COVID crisis than by shooting mannequins and putting them in a book. So it's just something that's a bit more light-hearted and silly. And that's it. That is the end. And if anyone is on Instagram and they want to have a look at a lot more of my work, then you can see me there. And if anyone wants to ask me any questions over social media, I'm more than happy to answer them. And I also do mentoring for other photographers as well. So if anyone needs a hand with anything from the perspective of getting published or technical advice, or just wants to chat about photography, then I'm one of nature's chatters. So I'm more than happy to do that. So
that's great, David. I'm not sure. I think Rob's got me blocked out at the moment, but there were a couple of questions coming up. And also some very positive comments as well. I think you've answered a lot of the questions that people wanted to ask you, but I think one of them is Anita's.
Yeah.
And she wondered whether there was anything you'd learned while you were doing your photograph, making this work, which is fantastic. You might have missed otherwise.
I think that's an interesting one. I think you learn as a photographer throughout your whole career. I think one of the things that I have learned is it always pays to be hypercritical about your work. You're always going to be your own harshest critic, and as soon as you lose that self-critiquing, then actually you've probably lost a lot of your edge. But one thing I would say is, don't be too harsh on yourself in terms of criticizing your work. Come back and look at it a while later, and a lot of the work that I shot, I thought was substandard because I'm such a harsh critic. I thought was substandard, but actually now I go back at it and look at it, I'm really proud of what I achieved. But I would say another thing that I've learned is really, if you want to be a project-based photographer, really do your homework first. Pressing the shutter is a really, really small part of actually being a photographer. Doing the homework, putting the groundwork in, creating a bond with your subject and creating an understanding of your subject is paramount when it comes to actually creating a successful body of work around any subject. You know, when you think about it, I mean, let's use a nominal shutter speed of 250th of a second. You know, that's what it takes to take a photo. But actually building the photo, building up to the photo and creating that vision is what the real art of photography is. And so work on that, and you know, I've known that for a long time now, but it's really cemented that into me as well. You know, I'm very, very lucky with this project. Like I said earlier, that I've really had 3 years to build up to it with this team of people. Not everyone has that luxury when they go to shoot a project.
No, that's right. And you were sharing with us your own medical condition earlier, and I know Rob was wondering, do you feel that that's also beginning to influence your photography now?
Totally. It influences not only my photography but everything about my life, because it gives you this incredible sense of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you, I mean, in many ways I think of it as an opportunity, you know. And as a documentarist, my initial response to being diagnosed was to document it. You know, I have a blog over on WordPress. You know, just David Collyer. Look for David Collyer on WordPress. It's called Walkabouts, and I started blogging and photographing my journey through the cancer thing. So it certainly taught me not to waste any time, really. Yeah, it does give you an incredible clarity. I mean, I'm sure, you know, the statistics will dictate that probably some of the people who are actually watching me talk tonight have also gone through a similar journey and had a diagnosis themselves. You know, I know that Rob has, certainly. He's shared that. But yeah, it makes you think about things in a different way. It's taught me an awful lot about myself. What would I say? I mean, I'm the type of person who likes to look at any adversity that you have in life as an opportunity, and I'll get a book out of it. Basically, that's the way I'm looking at it at the moment. It's yeah, it could have been a lot worse. I could still pee standing up, so it's okay, you know.
That's definitely positive.
I've got an excuse for not being able to hit the toilet all the time now as well. That's it.
I'm not sure about that one. It's I mean, you talked a bit about where you're going with your work next. I know Henry was asking about a little bit about that, but also you very much define yourself. Well, it's interesting. You seem to shift about between news photographer, documentary photographer, and I suppose they're overlapping categories, really. Have you thought about moving outside? I mean, this interest in mannequins, are you likely to move into still life or something like that?
I don't know about that, moving into still life. Certainly, I would say that almost every aspect of my photography, I would say, has a documentary element to it. So even the mannequins, it's kind of, there's a documentary element to it. There's always a story around it. So, you know, it's kind of, I always think, what's the difference between photojournalism and documentary photography? They're kind of two sides to the same coin, really. I do a lot of landscape work.
All right.
But my landscape work tends to be based around how man has changed the landscape. So I'm working on a project documenting the sort of post-industrial landscape of South Wales at the moment. So there's always that. I tend to, so most of the stuff I do is project-based. I've never not got a camera on me. I quite like just sort of taking photos of sort of quirky elements in life as well. I tend not to take my subjects too seriously, really. I like having a comical element in them. You know, it's very easy. I mean, I can look at documentary photography books all day long, but there's an element of documentary photography I find where it's almost got to be, a lot of people shoot it from a very, very sort of puritanical, dour perspective, and I try to move away from that. I try to introduce the quirkiness into it, and I always bridle at being called an artist. Whenever anyone talks about my photography, I was like, I'm not an artist. I'm not an artist. I'm a documentary photographer. But like I said earlier, I probably do put quite a lot more emphasis on composition and lighting than a lot of other documentary photographers, and that's one thing that I've really learned from Don McCullen's work. He was famous for standing up in the middle of a battle zone with a light meter, saying, "Well, if I'm going to get shot for taking photos, I'm going to bloody well make sure that the lighting's right in it." And
make sure it's a good one.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't die for a crap photo. That's it.
Yes, I'm just conscious of time now and thinking we probably ought to wind up for about 9, and I'll just do my little wind up thing. I mean, it's interesting, the comments you're making at the end there about, although it's documentary, you're still very conscious of how you frame up and what the image is like. That's an important part of it. And I suppose this group started out 30 years ago very much as a sort of alternative to a lot of camera groups as they were at the time, who were more focused around the equipment, not so much just making maybe more automatic sort of images. So a lot of the people we've had over the years have been fine art photographers, but we've always had this line of documentary photographers like Paul Hill and Sir Lisa Compton and Ian Beasley, people like that. And you just brilliantly fit into that. And when you look at their work, I mean, you think about Paul Hill, he has romantic pictures of documentary places and documentary pictures of romantic places. And it feels like you're in that sort of area.
Well, I think the beauty of photography is it is such a broad church.
Yeah.
There are so many different aspects of it. I mean, I collect photography books. I'm probably up around 200-300 books now. And there's definitely a large sort of bias towards sort of documentary and photojournalistic work, but then there's artwork in there as well. And I was introduced to Sergio Loren's work by David Hearn. He's a Chilean photographer, and he's the master of making photos out of nothing. I would advise anyone to have a look at his work. So Larrain is his surname, Sergio Loren, and it's just he epitomizes to me what it is to be a photographer, and we see things in a different way. I think I was cycling to work the other day, and I noticed that somebody had dumped a tin bath, a big old enamel bath outside a house, and it was an old overgrown bungalow with a corrugated iron garage, and I doubled back and I had the little Olympus on me, and I got down on my knees and I lined up a shot, and I was taking a shot of this bath with the house, and this guy just walked past and said, "What are you doing?" taking a photo. He went, "Why are you taking a photo of a bath?" And I went, "Well, because I'm a photographer." It's all I could say. And he said, "Yeah, but why?" I said, "Well, we see things in a different way. That's it." I said, it might be a really good photo. Subsequently, it actually turned out to be a really rubbish photo, but you never know until you take it, do you?
You don't know until you get there.
We all still take lots of rubbish photographs. And I always say this to people, I use social media a lot for selling work, and I put a lot of stuff on there. And people say to me, "How do you take that many good photos?" And I said, "Because I take a lot of bad photos as well."
Yeah.
You only see the photos that I deem good enough to put out there. I take a lot of rubbish as well. We all do.
And that's a really reassuring note. I think we'll bring it to an end. We will try and get, I've forgotten his name now, Sergio Loren.
But what I would say very, very quickly about rubbish photos is, if you haven't got it already, to anyone, buy the Magnum Contact Sheets book, because it makes you realise that these iconic photos taken by photographers that we all worship are part of a body of work, and they all take rubbish photos. We all do it.
Everybody does it.
Every time you think you're a rubbish photographer, go and look at the Magnum Contact Sheet book.
And you never know, even if you're not a photographer, if you take a lot of photographs, just one of them might be
totally
the one.
Yeah.
It's been a fantastic evening, David. Thank you very much on behalf of everybody. I'm getting positive messages coming through the chat, and Yeah, very good. So thanks very much. I think
It's been a pleasure.
we wind up. Thank you.
Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Dylan. I'm really, really pleased you were able to come along and do the talk. My own personal thanks as well, apart from the group as well. Thanks. And we'll be in touch about your future projects.
Yeah, definitely.
Certainly will.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Yes.